Welcome back to the Arise interview. I'm Charles Onyegolu. Now, Colin Powell was the youngest ever chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. And as many of us know, he also served as National Security Advisor and U.S. Secretary of State. And he was the first African American in all three of those posts. That, in and of itself, was an extraordinary achievement. A man who'd been smashing racial glass ceilings both in the military and ultimately in political life in the US for years. Right from the Reagan administration, when he was appointed National Security Advisor, then rising to even greater prominence in the administration of George Bush Sr., when he became the chair of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. And then came the first Gulf War, which made him a popular figure, and he remained popular throughout, across the American political and racial divide. Well, let's take you to the U.S. city of Philadelphia now, from where the African-American civil rights activist and member of the Mayor's Commission in Philadelphia, Stanley Straughter, joins me now. Mr. Straughter, thank you very much indeed for joining us. And I was looking at some photos earlier of you with Colin Powell. So clearly you met him a number of times and you communicated with him. Tell us what you remember of him.
Thank you, Charles, for inviting me. It's always good to be with the Rise. In my capacity as a board member of the Constituency for Africa in Washington, D.C., and I think you and some of your viewers know Mr. Melvin Foote, the president, we were engaged with the great Colin Powell for a number of different occasions. This photo here, we were honored to have to honor him, but with the board and to recognize his body of work during this period. Let me also point out that in addition to myself being there, we have the great Ambassador Clarence Todman next to Colin Powell, the former assistant administrator USAID, Vivian Lowry Derrick, and behind Ambassador Powell is the great Natimbe Mutombo and the former assistant secretary of commerce under Ron Brown, Lori Fitzmagatto. We composed the board at that time and was honoring the great general at that point in time. So he was a wonderful, wonderful human being. And for our work at advocating for Africa in the United States and abroad, he was very helpful to our organization, our board, providing commentary and content and suggestions to our leadership and assisting us even inside the Republican administration. We weren't all Republicans and Democrats, but the great Secretary Powell helped to make us understand that some of us, including especially him, rose above the individual politics of Democrat and Republican, and he was a wonderful human being and helped us to reach out and reach into the administration to assist. And I think you probably know with assistance of him and other people in the Republican administration, we had the greatest assistance that ever gone to Africa, which is the PEPFAR, President Emergency Program for AIDS Relief, a multi-billion-dollar project that is still in existence. Well, that evolved out of a Republican administration led by people like Colin Powell, of course, Condoleezza Rice, and others. But it helped us to broaden our perspective. It wasn't a Democrat or Republican issue. It was an issue around facing humanity. And he was one of those leaders that helped us to rise above individual party politics.
Well, thank you for that very interesting analysis of Colin Powell. And he's often, I mean, in summary of what you said, described as a decent, generous man who worked very closely with the African American community, but also with the immigrant community, because I saw him, I saw quite a lot of material on him, I think at City University in New York, where he was in very close communion with immigrants. And in fact, I think the immigrant department was named after him. I mean, what do you know of him in this regard?
We of course, you know, in Philadelphia, we're wonderful to have the opportunity to work with him, because I chaired the I'm Chairman Emeritus of the Mayor's Commission on African Caribbean Immigrant Affairs for the City of Philadelphia. And of course, we have a large contingent of Jamaicans, Jamaican Americans in our city and across the United States. And of course, the Secretary of State, Colin Powell, is from Jamaica. His historical roots are in that community. And so the idea of our reaching out to the immigrant community, especially the Black immigrant community, Charles, we have a broken immigration system in the United States. And then when it comes to Black immigrants, it's not only broken, it's disastrous. So the humanity, to try to get some humanity in the system, would take a leader like the Secretary of State, former Secretary of State Colin Powell, to bring an awareness and understanding of some of the suffering and tragedy that Black immigrants face inside the U.S. immigration system. So we're going to appreciate his contribution on that regard. As I said earlier, he's a great humanitarian. He could feel what our suffering and pain and suffering of many of our people, and he was helpful in bringing that type of humanity and greater understanding to around the issues faced by Black immigrants in the United States.
And it's interesting, isn't it? I mean, you mentioned that he was a Republican, and of course he served in 2 Republican administrations, but yet he came out and very clearly endorsed President Obama, not once but twice. I mean, was that because Mr. Obama was an African American, or was it because he felt Barack Obama's thinking was in the right place for America?
Clearly, Charles, I think is doing the latter. Secretary Powell said himself in his efforts to endorse President Obama that it was due to his positions around these issues, Obama's position around issues of humanity, and he would be the best person for the country at that time. So it was probably startling for many of us to hear such a distinguished diplomat like Colin Powell to say that, but he brought out to many of us his humanity and looking for the best we can have for our country at that time. And I think his explanation in his own words, as I pointed out, clearly provided all of us, as shocking it might have been as Republicans, stand up and support President Barack Obama. It was very profound in its own light, but also enlightening to many people because our country was going in a direction, as he mentioned, that he thought this young man could help bring us on the right track. So that's another area of his humanity example and also his commitment to the United States of America.
But I wonder if you might reflect for us from the African American community point of view on the consequences of the invasion of Iraq, because I mean they were so profound and devastating that it would be wrong not to at least reflect on that, as Colin Powell himself reflected on that very deeply.
Well, I think, Charles, that was certainly one of the, as all the historians will probably say, I'm not a historian, that was probably one of the most difficult parts of his time during his administration as Secretary of State. But I will assure you that he was so important to the administration that no one else could make that case to the United Nations at that time. And he used his leverage, his credibility in the global community to bring that case, irrespective of how flimsy it was. That's how much he respected. And I can remember some of my colleagues in the diplomatic community saying, we know he had to do it. We know he was a team player and he had to do it, but we don't believe it. So this, he even got a pass, and you can see, as you remember the history, how quickly, not only he took the hit, but he was able to recover from it as soon as it was clearly shown that there were no weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. So he even took that hit in his own grace and time. But what we're celebrating now is a totality of his work, his body of work to this nation and to the world. He did admit his mistake, and that's another element of a great man and a great humanitarian he shared with us.
Right. Well, Stan Straughter, I want to thank you very much indeed. And Stan Straughter is an African-American civil rights activist and member of the Mayor's Commission in Philadelphia. That's it for this edition of the Arise interview. Join us again tomorrow. From me and the entire team here in Abuja and around the world, bye-bye and thank you for watching.